pala.
Well, we'll talk about the missiles.
Yeah, the missiles.
The missiles, first of all,
IME.
July 1, let's backtrack a bit from IME, no? July 1, Putin mentioned, he took note, the deployment of the Typhoon missile system here in the Philippines by the United States, the first time outside of America, the United States. That sort of alarmed Putin and got him into telling his security and defense officials that we have to start developing our own missiles. And then yesterday, Senator Amy Marcos talking again about missiles. Possibly 25 spots in the Philippines or could be targets of missiles from China.
Hypersonic missiles from China. At nakita daw niya yung yung plano.
So is this a missile arms race, Richard?
Yes, it's definitely the missile defense arms race in many ways. Katulad na alam niyo, of course, naglapse na yung mga missile agreements, strategic missile agreements between Russia and the United States a few years ago during the Trump administration. So medyo lutang yung international arms regimes sa pagitan ng mga Moscow at saka Washington DC. Ito yung mga na-negotiate ng panahon pa ng Cold War, no, na nung superpower pang Russia. Having said that though, I'm not sure saan nakuha yung mga sinasabi na dozens of targets dito sa Pilipinas. 25. Sa TikTok ba nakuha yun or saan? But my point is, of course, I mean, if there's war, alam natin na ito target sa Pilipinas, diba? But it's not like war is gonna happen tomorrow or even the next year or so. That's the worst case scenario. Ang tanong ngayon is, how are we playing the deterrence game? How are we playing the balance of power or balance of missile power game right now? I think yun ang issue ngayon. Now, I'm of two minds here. Sa isang banda, I think it's none of Russia or Putin's business what the Philippines does with its relationship with the United States. We're a U.S. ally, right? And accordingly, based on our national interest, we can make decisions about what to do. Obviously, I think the calculation is there. If Philippines and Japan host more and more advanced missile defense systems, mahirapan ng China sumugod sa Taiwan. So in a way, this creates a new balance of terror or balance of missiles in the East Asian region, therefore less likely for Taiwan to be invaded. So in a sense, we're just balancing out what the Chinese are doing, which is putting all of these massive anti-cruise ballistic missile systems across their shorelines. So tatapatan lang yan. Having said that, another part of me is saying, actually, Putin saying a thing or two there is probably also because na-frustrate siguro siya sa Pilipinas because he was cultivating a very good relationship with us during Duterte. Duterte visited them twice. We had a $300 million chopper deal with them. They wanted to sell us submarines. They had a defense attaché here. I covered all of those issues back in the day. And I dealt a lot with Russian experts throughout the years. Ang basa ko dito is actually, especially if Trump becomes the president next year, which is more probable than not, based on current trends. Now, ibang usapan na if Biden steps down and something else happens. I think there's going to be an opening for the Philippines to rebuild some element of rapport with Russia. Because I think we can do what India and Vietnam are doing. It's true, of course, we're a U.S. treaty ally. So because of U.S. sanctions, yung CATSA, so-called CATSA, it will be hard for us to buy weapon systems from Russia. But I think it will make sense for the Philippines to have some level of diplomatic engagement with Russia because we have no territorial maritime disputes with Russia. And if there's one thing that I know about Russians is Russia cares about Russia. They may have great friendship with China, whatever, no limits friendship, but they also have very good relationship with Vietnam. Nakaribal ng China. They also have very good relationship with India, which is karibal ng China. And President Duterte deals with Russia because Russia has been helping Vietnam to develop its oil and gas resources in the South China Sea. So what I'm saying is that right now, syempre, dahil sa Ukraine, dahil sa relationship natin sa US, medyo we had to recalibrate our relationship with Russia. But next year, especially if Trump wins, and Trump will most likely also push for some sort of detente with Putin and try to end the war in Ukraine, I think there could be an opening for the Philippines also to establish a reasonable relationship with Russia para hindi magkakaroon ng isang Russia-China axis in this part of the world with us essentially in Team US and other side of the fence. I think there's some room for us to play a mediating middle power role here in this part of the world.
Interesting.
Pero Richard, at this point, wala naman tayong problema with Russia, di ba? Although yun nga, hindi natuloy, they were offering, not formally, yung mga arms nila sa atin before. Actually, meron pa tayong cooperation sa kanila. They gave us yung mga COVID vaccines nila. Kaya lang nga ngayon, Saka tatanong ko rin yan, no? Yung deployment ng missiles natin, does Russia even need that as an excuse? Talaga namang everyone is expecting them to build up their missiles. Dahil nga sa nangyayari sa Ukraine and Europe is closing in against them, they don't even need an excuse about missiles in the Philippines.
Well, I think
I'm not gonna use gaslight, baka ma-trigger.
Yeah.
But this is what the Russians do. I mean, after they invaded Ukraine, what did they think is gonna happen? Sweden and Finland, who have been neutral countries for a very long time, have joined NATO. Because na-spook sila. China building up its missile capabilities and talking about invading Taiwan for unification. Well, obviously, we're gonna react. Actually, all of us are reacting. Ang tanong ko naman dito is, our reaction could also be smart and calibrated.
Okay.
I think it makes sense for us to have some level of engagement with Russia, while cognizant of U.S. sanctions on Russia, while cognizant of what we believe in principle was wrong in terms of their invasion of Ukraine. So ang sinasabi ko lang dyan is, we don't have to be ally of Russia. We don't have to buy big weapon systems from them. They did provide us snipers. I think some of the weapons we use against ISIS and Daesh forces in Marawi. We export. So some big ticket defense deals, I think, are unlikely. But why not joint drills? No, why not? Let's have joint drills with Russia. Russia's had joint drills with ASEAN in the past. Some sort of a friendship drills, ASEAN, Russia again. In a sense that we will separate our stance in Europe. Obviously, we stand with Ukraine. We stand with international law there. But at the same time, I think we have to be also like maybe similar to Vietnam and India, have a kind of a multi-aligned, balanced relationship. Although, as I said, because we are a U.S. treaty ally, major trickier for us in terms of how deep we can go with the Russians.
I mean, Richard, I understand from that Putin is looking at the deployment of the Typhoon missile system here in the Philippines. They're not alarmed about the deployment here in the Philippines, but Putin sees it as an indication of a possible deployment of these missile systems in Eastern Europe, along the border.
Yeah, I think very good point. I actually didn't answer you directly on that. Ang big concern ni Putin is Poland, right? Ang big concern ni Putin
Finland
is
and Poland.
Deployment of certain American systems to Eastern Europe, which will negate the ability of Russia to strike back if ever sila yung tinira. Remember, what keeps peace between Russia and NATO is this mutual assured destruction scenarios. You hit us with nuclear weapons, we hit you with nuclear weapons. But if Poland has very advanced weapon systems like Typhoon among others, mahirapan ng Russia to strike back. And that will destroy the balance of missile power or terror they have. So I think yun yung more concerning Putin. Kaya I didn't make too much out of things in the Philippines. Like, what? He's gonna deploy missile systems to Vladivostok or, I don't know, Vietnam? I don't see that happening. So I think some people are just making too much noise out of some random stuff Putin is saying, or some people are making too much noise out. I don't know. They saw some TikTok thing na targeting ang Philippines. So we have to be careful. As I said, no reason for panic, no reason for complacency, but a lot of reason for diplomatic creativity. So personally, I'm on all solidarity with Ukraine. I think we have done the good job in terms of supporting Ukraine different resolutions. At the same time, I think we have to be also open to making sure there will be no Russia-China axis in our part of the world. And we make sure that Russia will be a responsible actor.
Richard, isn't that too late? Because
ibang usapan ng Europe.
You mentioned we have to make sure that there's no Russia-China axis, but isn't that too late? Because there's already that friendship without limits, that alliance or partnership without limits between Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin, which was facilitated by the United States, right?
Yeah, so the big game of geopolitics over the past 100 years is the romance of the three powers or kingdoms, right? Russia, Soviet Union, or Tsarist Russia, China, and the United States. So we saw throughout history nag-evolve itong triangular relationship, right? So the best thing, for instance, the U.S. did under Nixon and Kissinger was to drive the divide or actually exploit the divide between Soviet Union and China. I think Trump will try to do that again. I won't be surprised if Trump will try to strike a deal over Ukraine, end the war there, and then improve relations with Russia, and then try to
China.
end this strategic flirtation between Russia and China. Of course, they're going to say a lot of things, but at the end of the day, these are two superpowers who care for their own interests. These are two superpowers who have their own issues. Look at Siberia, look at Russia's own problems with China. One reason why they have a lot of their nuclear weapons facing east is not because of US or NATO. We know which country they're worried about. So I think that axis is definitely more solid than many Western analysts were dismissive of this is. But I think it's not the end of the story. Just look at how warm Putin was when he visited the Indians, who are no friend of China. When he visited Vietnam recently, just a few weeks ago, Vietnamese are not necessarily friends of China too. Russia wants also options. They don't want to be a factotum of China. They don't want to be just dependent on China. They want friends and allies, or at least they don't want to be a complete rogue state. And
Okay.
having some sort of a interaction with a country like the Philippines is a big diplomatic point for them. That's what love nila si Duterte nun eh.
Okay,
I'm not saying
Richard.
let's go Duterte, but I'm saying let's not go totally their enemy.
Anyway, Richard, do I gather from what you've been saying is that a Trump presidency might be good insofar as it will attempt to divide Russia and China. Might be good for world
This would-
peace, actually.
Well, again, if you're Ukrainian or you're from Europe, I think Trump is bad news.
Yeah, but
and
for the-
I think the discussion nowadays is Europe alone. But if you're in the Philippines, many people here, this is not necessarily my personal opinion. I have my own issues about U.S. and democracy and all of that. But on a geopolitical level, I think him ending the war in Ukraine, him driving a wedge between China and Russia, or at least making sure that Axis doesn't fully solidify, could create some strategic dividends in our part of the world. Yeah.
Good for the Philippines, that's what they're saying. It might be good
In
for
theory,
the Philippines.
yes. In theory, yes. And we should also adjust accordingly. I mean, if Trump is going to play the Moscow game, we should also establish some communication
Because we have to remember,
with
right,
Moscow, right?
Right, Richard. We have to remember during his first campaign, he was saying that Putin was somebody he could deal with. Trump was saying
Yeah, I mean,
that Putin
yeah,
was somebody
Trump says he
he
can
could deal
deal with Russia, he can deal with Iran, he can deal with China. But I think of those three major powers, the karibal ng US, I think Russia will be the one that I'm very optimistic about compared to the other two. Optimistic not in the sense that I morally support it, optimistic in the sense that I think there's significant rapport between him and Putin to sort it
Richard,
out. Now, of course,
with-
others will make more out of this rapport.
with. Okay, Richard, parang
Richard, with
nagbago
what's
ka na.
happening now after the debate, you think Trump has a greater chance? Wag mo nang pansinin yung mga surveys. Ikaw lang, personally, basa mo. Will Trump, fearless forecast, meron ba? May
I think
pag-asa
Trump-
ba? Manalo.
Yeah.
November.
I think Trump, maybe Trump did too well. Although, of course, if you paid attention to some of the things he said, you're not sure. But,
Yeah.
but I think he said he just did too well. So ngayon, baka
Yeah.
ma-replace talaga si Biden. I think there's a very, probably the probability is more than 50% na Kamala Harris or someone else might step in. Because it's going to be very hard. Biden, he makes one more mistake, I think it's over. It will be almost impossible for him to sustain it. And so the polls are very worrying. And we see that behind the scenes, even Obama and other Democratic stalwarts are suggesting baka we have to look at alternatives now. So maybe Trump, Pyrrhic victory ang nangyari dito. Maybe he's now going to force the Democrats to come up with an alternative, much younger, much more vigorous, and much more competitive.
Pero hindi ba magmumukhang
Kaya
kulilat yung mga
embarrassed nga daw
Democrats
mga
if they pull out at
Amerikano
this
nga,
point?
4th of July. They're embarrassed about their
Ano,
country.
Battle of the Aged daw, sabi nila, Battle of the Aged. No, I mean, I'm still recovering from that debate. Alam ni Patrick yan. But very interesting times. I think a lot of fluidity there. Kaya nga tayo mga Pilipino, wag lang tayong umaasa ng anong gusto ng Amerika. Isipin din natin ang maganda sa ating national interest. We have no territorial maritime disputes with Russia. I condemn what happened in Ukraine, but I think we have to have reasonable relationship with all major powers, not only the United States.
Okay. Which we're seeing India doing, right, Richard?
Which is India doing, which is what Vietnam is doing. I think India is even a more interesting case because they're a democracy like us,
Yeah.
right? So mas nakaka-relate ako sa India kaysa Vietnam because Vietnam is a communist country. So I think India is showing the way that for democracies like us, we can have very good relationship with the US. We are a democracy, but that should not prevent us from multi-alignment, meaning having reasonable relationship with many powers. Now, of course, unlike India, we are a treaty ally. So even may limitations yan. But as I said, it shouldn't be like level 10 Duterte and then 0. Why not level 4 out of 10? Some sort of relationship with Russia. Some
kinda
drills,
saw-
some communication channels, some strategic flirtation in our part of the world while we hold the line on the Ukraine issue na mali talaga yung invasion ng Ukraine. And it's doable. I mean, if you're really a smart, strategically mature country, you can juggle it all. That's what Vietnam and India have been doing all this time. Why can't we do it?
I
We should be able
understand
to
that
do it.
we saw that kind of diplomacy, foreign policy during Marcos I.
Yes,
We were a
and
treaty
Marcos
ally with
One
MDT,
was one of the
but we had
first
relationship
countries to
with
normalize relations with China. And guess
China.
who,
And all
and
communist
guess who,
countries.
Patrick, oversaw that? It was Bongo Marcos and Imelda in 1974
Imelda. Yeah.
who met Mao Zedong to set the
Well,
tone
not,
for the
not, not
founders
only that,
visit the
Richard.
next year.
Remember, the former president would send his wife. Okay, he might not be able to
Exactly.
do it himself because of he was tied as a treaty ally of the United States. His hands were tied. We had bases here, but he would send his wife to Libya,
And his
to
son.
Cuba,
And his son.
to all the
Yeah,
axis
exactly.
of evil back then during the Cold War, no, to Romania and
I
all
think,
that.
Patrick, shuttle diplomacy could be one way. If there's one person na sophisticated who can deal with different countries, who probably speaks different languages, if Marcos can find someone like that, a special envoy guy or lady, to go all around, whether it's Moscow, whether it's Beijing, whether it's Tehran, whatever, and make sure to see our options are open, why not? Why not? I mean, Bongo Marcos, if there's one thing I believe he should copy from his father, is foreign policy
Foreign
dexterity.
policy, right.
I'm not fan of Marcos Sr.'s domestic politics, but his foreign policy,
foreign policy, yeah.
was really global statesmanship. And back then, we were a much poorer country. We're a much less developed country. We're now a middle power almost. So why not? Why not? So thank you for pointing that out. That's an important precedence that could serve as an inspiration for Marcos Jr., who I think is quite a sophisticated guy in terms of understanding global affairs. Yun lang, marami mga dito sa Pilipinas na parang Team China, Team US lang inisip nila. Dapat we go beyond that. Pangbata yun eh. That's a puerile strategic mindset. We have to be a sophisticated country, look beyond,
Right,
diversify, while, of course, standing our ground on the South China Sea issue, on the West Philippine Sea issue, and of course, continue to condemn what happened in Ukraine.
I just like to point out,
Kaya
Richard,
yan.
Marcos One also cut the lease of the bases from 99 years to 25. That was an important thing.
And-
also, I think that's to
Yeah,
be said.
and he juiced out the Americans. He juiced out the Americans. He made sure, you're going to have bases here. You paid for that, right? Nothing for free. Ang pinaka-sinigurado ni Marcos Sr. is that will not be taken for granted and will not will not offer ourselves on the cheap. I think yun yung naging concern ko sa mga iba't ibang Filipino leaders. They offered themselves too cheaply to either US or China. That's not good for the Philippines. That undermines our...
In fact, paalala ko lang, no, Beijing remembers actually that Imelda Marcos, during the time na of the first President Marcos, she was the one na who established ties with China. Natatandaan nila yan. And I think they mentioned it to President Marcos.
Oh, she was best friends,
The
ano?
new President
Yeah.
Marcos.
I mean, she was
1974.
best friends with
Yes.
a lot of dictators from that era.
Yes.
Remember Fidel Castro,
Yeah,
Fidel
they
Castro,
remember.
Ceausescu,
Gaddafi.
Gaddafi.
Well, there
Yeah.
was an element of glamour diplomacy too.
Right.
No? I mean,
She
Imelda
wowed them.
being glamorous,
The former
being
First
with
Lady
Empress of
would wow
Iran,
them.
with,
I don't
being
know,
with the
you
Queen
need
of
somebody.
Thailand. And
Yun eh, baka wala kang
glamour
ganun
is
eh.
part of diplomacy of Marcos's. Yeah.
Yung missiles, may clarification ng National Security Council. Ha? Sabi nila, they are not detecting any kind of threat na yung binabanggit na yan. Na
Actually,
missiles
hindi
aimed at
ko,
us.
hindi ko
Wala
pa
daw
rin
silang
nasagot,
nadidetect.
Amy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we still don't know ano ba talaga yung kwento ng typhoon. I'm sure probably some other guys know it better. Kasi hanggang ngayon, mystery pa rin eh. Deploy ba siya? Dumaan lang ba siya dito? Andito pa rin ba siya, di ba?
Wala namang bala, Richard eh.
Iniwanan for the Balita.
Yung launcher lang, walang kasamang
We can
bala.
use it to our advantage.
Walang kasamang
But, Patrick,
bala.
we can use
To
that
be
to our
fair,
advantage.
di ba? The typhoon came here without any
Ambiguity,
missile on
strategic
it.
ambiguity.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, no. Ang point ko is, you tell China, or even Russia for that, but Russia, I don't want to make too much out of what Putin said. China talagang issue dito, di ba? You say to China, no, we're not deploying it yet, unless you give us more reason to deploy it. Again, leverage it. Kasi kung wala ka naman leverage, bakit ka re-respetuhin ng China? Kaya when people say, oh, we need diplomacy with China, I say, yeah, water is wet. Like, okay, of course we need diplomacy with China, but on what terms? What is our leverage? What is our bargaining chip? Our bargaining chip is the access we can offer the Americans. It's all of these missile defense systems, etc. So I'm saying use that as a leverage. Be ambiguous about it, but not just ambiguous for the sake of ambiguity. Strategically exploit that for our national interest. Dapat ganun tayo mag-isip. We have to be serious people. This is a serious, scary, uncertain world. And if Trump wins next year, it's going to be even more uncertain and potentially scary. But also opportunities will come with that. Kaya we have to be prepared. We have to be fluid. And that's why I appreciate these discussions. Because we're looking at, hindi pwede na ideological ka lang na ito lang pwede or ito lang pwede. You adjust to the circumstances, and the circumstances are shifting on a daily basis almost in our part of the world.
Okay?
How about,
Thanks.
Sorry,
very
Ed,
quickly,
may sasabihin.
we also have our own hypersonic missiles ready, courtesy of India and the
BrahMos.
joint venture with Russia, the BrahMos. It arrived in April.
Yeah.
BrahMos is supersonic. No. BrahMos is
Hypersonic.
supersonic. But because meron na tayong BrahMos, I think Mach 4 lang yata yun or something, we will be in a good position to get the hypersonic version ng BrahMos. So level 1, level 2 lang yan. So we may also have access to well, Russian-made almost, di ba? Kasi yung BrahMos, Soviet-Indian project yan, di ba?
Right.
So actually, we're preparing ourselves. We will have also our hypersonic. But anyway, I don't know about a certain senator, pero yung hypersonic missile na yan, it's still in the exploratory initial stage. Its efficacy in the battlefield is still up for debate. From what I understand, it was used by Russia in Ukraine, but it has not been as effective and scary as many people said. But in theory, hypersonic missiles are harder to detect and to shut down because their trajectory is more out of, I don't know, whatever people saw on TikTok about targets in the Philippines and all. Medyo war agad. Bakit ganun tayo mag-isip war agad? Mas nagpapatakot tayo ng sarili natin. That's not a smart way of approaching international affairs.
Okay, thanks for joining the Storycon this Thursday. Richard Heydarian, our resident geopolitical analyst. Thank you, Richard.